My name is George Leventhal, and I work for all of you. I've been your at-large county council member on the Montgomery County Council for the last 16 years. It's been my privilege to chair the Health and Human Services Committee during that period of time. Both of my parents were physicians. My father is still alive, and both of them were at NIH. That's what brought them to Montgomery County in the 1960s. I have such a high regard for the practice of medicine, although my own skill set did not lie in that direction. I did just receive my PhD in public policy in December, and throughout my career, I've tried to advance the goals of public health, of curing disease and alleviating suffering in my limited capacity without having the scientific or the medical capability. And my mother, in particular, was a great inspiration to me. Dr. Bridget Gray Leventhal was a distinguished clinical researcher. She was a pediatric oncologist. And she founded, after she left NIH, she founded the Children's Cancer Research Center at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. My mother sadly got cancer of the colon, and we lost her in 1994. And my second son, Francisco, was born in 1998. When he was about a year old, he was diagnosed by his pediatrician with Wilms tumor, a cancer of the kidney. His pediatrician was a close colleague and friend of my mother, Bridget Leventhal. In fact, my mother had asked Dr. Paul Leventhal, some of you may know him, distinguished pediatrician here in Montgomery County, to look after her grandchildren after she was gone. And Dr. Leventhal referred my son, Chico, when he was just a little baby, to the Children's Cancer Research Center at Johns Hopkins, and it worked out great. His kidney was removed, and he underwent radiation therapy and chemotherapy, and he's now 19 years old. He's a freshman at the University of Maryland, and he's big and strong and healthy, and he's thriving. But you know, when you have an infant under those circumstances, it's very stressful, and my wife and I would say to each other, you know, if only Bridget were here to give us advice. And people at the hospital would say, oh, it's all right. She knows. She's here. Well, that might have been comforting, except many of you will appreciate that my mother was a scientist, and she was someone who believed that if you couldn't prove it, it wasn't real. And although she was dedicated to our Jewish faith, she really didn't believe in life after life. But here's the thing. The doctors who cured my son had been selected and trained by my mother. The treatment therapies that were employed to prevent the recurrence of cancer had been pioneered by my mother. The physicians' assistants and nurses had been recruited and mentored by my mother. So the groundbreaking work that my mother had done saved the life of the grandson she never met. And if you want to understand why I believe so passionately, without a technical background of my own, in the biotechnology and life sciences enterprise, it's because of the way that it touched my own life and the inspiration that my mother left behind. And so it's such a privilege for me to be here with all of you and to have the opportunity to try to put in place a healthy climate so that we can continue to advance this industry for our future, an industry that is consistent with our values. You know, we're a very fortunate county, and sometimes my most fortunate and well-endowed constituents complain the loudest because they have the most agency and they have the greatest sense of entitlement. We're very fortunate to live here, but I'm sure all of you hear a lot, well, Northern Virginia is eating our lunch. You know, Northern Virginia is doing better than we are by, I don't know what sort of existential scale you would measure one very wealthy and successful community against another. We're a highly desirable place to live. We've made some different land use and planning decisions, but we're doing very, very well. But we benefit from an innovation cluster that is directly related to the presence of our life science agencies, NIH, FDA, and others. And Virginia benefits from its proximity to the Pentagon. So sometimes we say, well, we'll concentrate on the life sciences and we'll let them concentrate on the death sciences. I'm very, very proud of this industry. I'm very, very proud of our knowledge cluster and what it means for our future and what it means for the stability of an enterprise that will never go away. There will always be a need for new treatments, new therapies, new pharmaceuticals, new devices, and much as we will find cures for some disease, there will always be some new disease that we need to address. And so what you do if you want to strengthen an economy is you build on the strengths that you have, even as you seek to innovate and build other capabilities. And the greatest strength that we have is our life science industry. So I'm a great promoter and cheerleader for the quality of life and our business climate in Montgomery County. It's not a secret that I'm in the midst of an electoral contest right now, and that there are some individuals running for office who want to capitalize on an idea that Montgomery County is bad for business. Well, my view is that if you really want Montgomery County to be bad for business, a good way to achieve that would be relentlessly talk about how we're bad for business. What I think is good for business is to get to know each other in our innovation industries. And so tonight, I hope we can begin that process. I hope we can network with each other. I hope we can hear from leaders in the field so that we can deepen and strengthen the sense of identity we have to be proud of the work that we're doing here in Montgomery County, Maryland. Now, I have a bill pending, which was very well received by industry. It was suggested that we should be the first county in America to provide a local match for NIH, SBIR, and STTR grants. There are a few states that have done this. There is no county to date that has done it. And we don't have unlimited resources, but when you invest a small amount of public resources in a cascading private knowledge base, you're going to get returns vastly greater than what you put in. And so as we brand ourselves even further, we already are, but as we continue to brand ourselves as a biotech-friendly community, the public hearing that we held in January on this bill was overwhelmingly positive. And I said, you know, what if the most that we can do with these little grants is in maybe the mid-5 figures? It may not be a great deal of money, and the grants that are being drawn down are in the millions from NIH. And the answer was, we would love it. The money will be unrestricted. It will show local support. It will help us leverage more private and public investment. And so, so that was a hit. We haven't enacted it yet. If you want to weigh in with your other county council members in support of that legislation, that would be helpful. But that's just one idea that I put on the table. It's been very well received. When people tell me we have a bad business climate, I ask them, what do you think we should do about it? And generally the answer I get is, I don't know, you're the elected official, you figure it out. So I hope tonight we can be in a process. First of all, I don't think we do have a bad business climate. I think we're an extraordinary place to do business, and Amazon would not have put us on their short list for their second headquarters if we had a bad business climate. But we can always do better. We can always be more welcoming. We can always be more receptive. We can always be more innovative. We can always try new things. And so tonight it's a very simple question. What should Montgomery County, Maryland be doing to foster and encourage this healthy industry of which we are so proud, in which we believe so strongly, in which we absolutely are committed as a local government to strengthening and growing? That's the question. What should Montgomery County be doing? So I want to thank our distinguished panel of speakers. I particularly want to thank my very good friend Rich Bendis, who has been leading this charge. Biohealth innovation is a national model of a public-private partnership that brings together the very best thinking to achieve precisely this purpose, not only for Montgomery County, but for the entire state of Maryland. Rich has been a tremendous help in putting this together. I know many of you are here because you get his e-bulletins, and I want to thank you for coming, and I'm going to turn the microphone over now to Rich Bendis, Biohealth Innovation.
Thank you. And Councilmember Leventhal, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk a little bit about the biotech, biohealth industry within Montgomery County. And to be honest with you, biohealth innovation wouldn't exist today if it wasn't for the vision of the political leaders within Montgomery County who 7 to 8 years ago said, we do a lot of great research within Montgomery County, but how come we don't get many products, new jobs, and taxes generate with all that great research that's being done within Montgomery County? what can we do to stimulate more active commercialization, more entrepreneurship, and how do we attract more public and private funds within Montgomery County?
My name is Jared Borkat. As Rich mentioned, we are good, close partners with BioHealth Innovation and think that they are doing fantastic work to help grow the economy here, specifically in the life sciences biohealth area. So just a little bit of background on me. I've been at MedImmune for about going on 8 years now. I've held a variety of roles, and currently I'm in the Partnering and Strategy group. So our group handles licensing, spinning companies out, and also what we call ecosystem building. So I'll talk a little bit more about ecosystem building, but maybe a shorter and extremely positive note that Rich alluded to earlier. MedImmune and AstraZeneca announced today that we are spinning out a company with our inflammation and autoimmune disease assets. So we have 6 assets going into that company, and we see this as a fantastic opportunity to help grow the biohealth within Montgomery County. We've worked very closely with Montgomery County on this, and the process has been extremely smooth. The people have been great to work with, and we are greatly appreciative for that. The company's name is Viela, and if you Google AstraZeneca, I think that will probably be one of the first things that shows up today. So we're very excited about that. So a little bit about the journey that I've been on over the last couple of years. To give you a bit of context, we got a new CEO of AstraZeneca in 2012, and one of the decisions that he made was that Gaithersburg, Maryland would be one of the 3 worldwide R&D centers for AstraZeneca. So we had to take a step back and just reflect on that and ask ourselves, what does this mean for us? What does this mean for the community, and how we interact with the community? And the way that we answered that question was we set out a very bold ambition for this to become one of the top 3 biohealth clusters in the country by 2023. So I can go into more detail later about it, but we set out a strategy of how we could engage with the community to realize that vision. So we started with the idea of collaborating locally. We realized that in our 25-year history, we did not have many collaborations with local institutions, federal institutions, or academic institutions. So one of the first things we did was we set up a joint research collaboration with University of Maryland, with Johns Hopkins, and then a first-of-its-kind collaboration with NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And under those, we were able to start numerous projects and really get fully engaged and access the great local science that we have. The second part of our strategy was to get people connected. And I think that's something that Councilman Leventhal mentioned earlier about getting connected and getting to know who's in the community within our same industry. And I think it's something we've been striving to do for many years now, from hosting CEO dinners to an annual bowling event and opening up the doors of MedImmune and AstraZeneca to happy hours for any scientist in the community that's working on related areas, because we understand the importance of getting and staying connected. And then I would say that the next part of the approach that we took was to really help get involved in policy and helping to shape how we as a state think about the biohealth industry and how we can help drive that forward with our expertise. And now we're helping small companies where we can to help them grow so that we can have more MedImmunes, more AstraZenecas. So that's a little bit of background about the approach we've taken over the past couple of years. I think it's been an incredible journey. I think we've made a lot of progress. And I think one other point related to that is I always challenge people from other companies to answer the question, how can they play a role? I was in a meeting this morning and they were talking about the importance of industry and how industry needs to work together to address some of the issues we have and to really carry us to the next level. So I would just put that challenge out for everyone, is what can we personally do, either for our companies or personally, to get involved and to help take us to the next level to become a top 3 biohealth cluster by 2023. So.
Thank you, Jared. Dr. Austin.
Yes, I have a lot of thoughts. So I'm just going to give you some random ones, and maybe hopefully we'll come back to some of them in the discussion. So first of all, I hope either Jared or Rich will talk about the work that the LASAB has been doing that all three of us have been involved in the Governor's Life Science Advisory Board, which has been gratifying, I think, to all of us because it's shown that though we all live in Montgomery County, that there's interest in this from the governors has really been gratifying and very helpful. My background, I'm a physician by background. I'm a neurologist and an internist. I'm also a basic geneticist. That was my training. And then I spent a number of years in pharma. I was at Merck in Pennsylvania for many years. And then came to NIH about 15 years ago and have done a variety of things at the NIH during that time. But if there's one theme that I've stayed true to, it's that the enormous potential which the taxpayers have created in supporting the NIH over the last 50 years has yet to break out to really lead to the kind of health and economic development that I think all of us who are in this field believe is possible. And so I've spent a lot of time, as have my colleagues on the panel here, thinking about, well, how do we make that work better? The term of art that's used in the medical scientific world for that process of going from a lab discovery that you read about in the newspaper, or gene for this, gene for that, to an intervention that, say, MedImmune would eventually create and market. That whole process is called translation. That's the term of art. So when you hear translational science, that's what we're talking about, that whole process. I was thinking about what our challenge is in making translation work better. Today, believe it or not, when I was on the NIH campus talking about deer, and you might think, what the heck does deer on the NIH campus have to do with growing biohealth in Montgomery County? Well, I think one gives us a way to think about the other. That is that deer have become a real problem on the NIH campus because the ecosystem is so positive for them that they're growing, as if I might say, like rabbits, and they're becoming a real problem. And why is that? You don't have to create. We don't have to need postdoc programs for deer. They're created to this. They come to this environment because the ecosystem is so attractive to them that they want to be there. And I think that's what we need to focus on in Montgomery County. If you look at why places like Boston or San Francisco have been successful, it's that they've created that kind of ecosystem which supports these species that we want. Now this is absolutely possible. It's been done. There are lots of examples, and they're sitting on either side of me about how this is done. I'll just give you one example to show you in our world how this happens. So a project that started at NCATS probably 10 years ago now out of one of the intramural programs at the Child Health Institute, involved a couple of other universities across the country, but the expertise was really at the NIH. But the expertise was in fundamental and clinical science, was in the genetic side and the basic side. And there wasn't anybody to do the translation to get from one to the other, and that's where we came in. And as a result of that work, we got to the point where the project was so-called de-risked enough. That's another term of art that you might hear, probably will hear a lot when it comes to the kind of work that we're in. That is, how do you take a fundamental discovery, which has a lot of potential, but a lot of risk of failure because we don't really understand really how much real value there is in this discovery. But when it's de-risked enough, when the risk is decreased enough, then a company can form around that because companies can meet their fiduciary responsibility to their investors by not taking too much risk. So that de-risking function is something that our organization does. As a result of that, a new company, a new called Vitesse was formed, and it was formed by two people from MedImmune who had been at MedImmune before. and wanted to stay in the region because it's such a great place for they and their families to live. And after that company grew enough, it was acquired for about, exactly $200 million by Sucampo, which is another Montgomery County company, also started by some refugees from MedImmune. And then that company was acquired for $1.2 billion by Mallinckrodt, which is a large German company, just recently. All that happened, all of the economic activity happened in about 2 years because of the value that had been created. Now there's nothing special about this case. There's no reason why this couldn't be done over and over and over and over again. But there are some things that need to be done in the ecosystem, I think, that will make the place better or more attractive for those deer we want to live here. And I hope we'll talk about that for the rest of the day. So here's a deer sitting there tonight.
Here's a deer.
Here's a deer.
We need more of them.
Yeah.
And they probably don't know how much they've affected my ecosystem. So as Rich mentioned, I was a postdoc at NCI. But before that, I actually came down to the region fresh out of undergraduate, and I was educated at Hopkins, got my PhD. Got my PhD up at School of Public Health there. Came down to NCI. Actually, almost went out to California at that point. Came back, came down to NCI, worked at cancer research, and within about a year of coming to NCI, I actually applied to a grant from NCATS to use the RNA screening facility that you set up there. We won that grant, and I also was part of TCJ, huge government initiatives, and I was able to take advantage of these huge data sets and huge facilities that were there, and we developed a platform to develop new cancer therapeutics matched up to patient genomics, combining high-throughput screening with analyzing genomic data that was being generated. Really wanted to start a company about that, really didn't know how, honestly. I met, at that time, I met Rich, I met Todd, who was an entrepreneur in residence who split time with NIH and BHI, and they said, why don't you come? You have a really great scientific background. We have a company that we think you could help us with, and that was Memetis. That was the Dutch company that came here. And so I got into Memetis. I wrote an SBIR grant almost as soon as I joined that company. It, of course, didn't even get scored. But then we wrote a couple more, and eventually we won our first one. And now we've won 4 SBIR grants for that company, 2 from NCATS, actually. And we've developed a hepatotoxicity screening platform that can hopefully de-risk therapeutics. And we've also developed some cancer models that can hopefully better predict how drugs would respond in vitro in that platform. And while that was happening, all the time, I still went back and volunteered at NIH. We got IP filed around the original discoveries, advanced the drugs from kind of initial compounds to lead therapeutics in vitro, and then we spun it out. Once the IP was filed, we spun it out to a company. That happened in 2017. In the last year, we took a little while to find a good team, but we found a great team, all people living in Montgomery County. There's 3 of us now. We won our first SBIR for NCI, and I think very soon we'll close our seed round with all local investors in Montgomery County. And I think, MedImmune also affected that process. As when I came to BHI, one of the first things I did, MedImmune said, we want more interaction with NIH. Go look through the portfolio and give us things. I probably brought 25 things to MedImmune, and maybe one they said is worth telling them about. And that was a really eye-opening process to understand what's the difference between an invention filing at NIH and things that therapeutic companies will be interested in later stage. And it helped us craft the message and the path for the current company so that I'm leading as well. So.
Nice.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, tremendous. So here's what I'm taking from this first round, and we'll open it up for questions from the audience. First of all, I'm encouraged to hear that we're doing a lot of things well, that the role that the county played in endowing biohealth innovation obviously was vital to Anthony's company and helped the whole concept of an entrepreneur in residence appears to be successful. When I've heard about it, I'm super excited about it, that there would be someone who the county has endowed, who combs through the work that's being done at NIH, that looks at where there might be venture capital, where there might be promising researchers, arranges those marriages. I mean, that's just a beautiful model, and it's an example of a federal, local government, and private industry partnership. The other thing that I'm hearing from Jared is that the private sector plays a big role too, that the mentoring and the taking people in and showing how it can be done, that the whole industry benefits when the whole enterprise benefits, so that MedImmune doesn't feel threatened by startup companies. MedImmune wants to partner with startup companies, and that if you provide that comfortable environment, that ecosystem, everybody benefits. So it's not a zero-sum game. So those are a couple of my observations. I'm in suspense, Chris, where you said there's more we can do to create that ecosystem. So I'm waiting to hear what those things are.
I mean, maybe we'll throw it back to Chris, but he mentioned the Life Science Advisory Board. There's been a Life Science Advisory Board that was appointed originally by Governor O'Malley and now been reappointed with a new board by Governor Hogan. And the purpose of the Life Science Advisory Board is to determine what Maryland's role should be within the life science and the biohealth industry. What are the strengths? What are the gaps? What can we do to address those gaps? And the Life Science Advisory Board is made up of government, academic, industry, and non-governmental organizations on the board to give all of their insights to it. And so one of the things that we are working together on, and it's Jared and Chris Austin and I, is that one of the subsets of that LSAB is called a Federal Commercialization Task Force, talking about things that we could do better. And I'm sure that Dr. Austin will talk about that. One of the challenges we have is NIH has 6,000, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, scientists located primarily in Montgomery County in 27 different research institutes, each with a different disease or specialty about them. The NIH is totally funded $30 billion a year. $3 billion of that funding is called intramural funding, which all gets invested in these institutes, which are located right within Montgomery County. $27 billion of it goes to academic research institutions and researchers throughout the United States. But if you take that $3 billion, it's the largest life science funding of any research entity in the world, and it's located in Montgomery County, funding 6,000 scientists to do basic research. The problem is there is a disconnect, and I'm going to let Chris talk about that, because there is a conflict of interest policy that has been instituted within the NIH, which does not incentivize the researchers to interact actively or proactively with industry or people in the investment community. And I'll just leave that as an intro for you to discuss. That's a challenge, but an opportunity that we need to address.
Yeah, it's an enormous opportunity, and it's something. If you were at the biohealth region meeting at MedImmune last year, you know there was a panel on this that Jim Greenwood ran, and we talked about this a little bit. You know, what the problem has been a number of things that the LSAB has worked on and is really trying to work on solutions for now. But essentially, what has happened is that there is such concern about misuse of federal dollars, and as Rich said, you know, conflict of interest rules, that there has essentially been an electrified fence put around the science on the intramural campus. I often say that, you know, those of you who've been to NIH, you notice there's a literal fence that goes all around it now, but there's also an intellectual fence, which is tragically counterproductive. And I use that word tragically on purpose, because the kind of thing that you're hearing does happen, but these projects are like the bunny rabbit who goes under the fence. You know, there are ones that get out, but compared to what the potential is that's kept in, it's heartbreaking, really, for someone who lives in that environment all the time. So one of the things that the LSAB is doing, and Rich is trying to drive this, is to identify what those limitations are and see what the state could do to help that situation. And it's a situation which has been a long time in developing, but you know, I think if the folks who created these rules understood just how much improvement in health and economic activity would happen if these rules were relaxed a bit, so that NIH could act like Hopkins, for instance, or University of Maryland. NIH plays with completely different rules, completely different laws, but just imagine now the number that Rich gave you, $3 billion, which is correct, and then you ask, well, what is the top university or medical school in the country in terms of getting NIH extramural dollars, the $27 billion that Rich referred to? Well, that number one recipient of NIH dollars is Johns Hopkins. So the top two in the entire country are in Maryland. And we're, in case you missed it, we're at Johns Hopkins today. And so in the LSAB, we're in this sort of embarrassment of riches where there's enormous potential, but there are both things that have been done to prevent that potential from being realized, and some things which just don't exist, which we think are trying to be created. And perhaps Rich or Jared, you could talk about what some of those other issues are.
Could I clarify one thing, Chris? So I have a limited understanding, and others in the audience may need a layman's explanation. Yeah. So when you talk about the conflict of interest issue, as I understand it, basically, you have a researcher, the researcher makes a discovery, the researcher can hold a patent, but the royalties on the patent revert to the federal government if the discovery was made in a federal lab. Is that pretty much it?
Part of it, and maybe we'll ask you to talk about this a little bit, because you've lived this. But by conflict of interest, what I mean is that and different institutes are a little bit different. NCI is really more enlightened when it comes to this, but there is concern about, as much as anything, around appearances, politically potent appearances, that federal employees are enriching themselves because of work that they did for the federal government. And so as a result of this, individuals at NIH, despite their skills, cannot even serve on the boards of biotech companies. So with all of these biotechs in Montgomery County, I get calls all the time. Can you please be on our board? And they don't even need to compensate. It doesn't matter. I don't need to get paid, but I can't. It's illegal for me to lend my expertise to them, which is just remarkably wrong-headed. And that's the kind of thing that we got to fix.
Is there an issue with patents and royalties also?
I don't think.
There is, actually.
Well, maybe there is. Yes, there is. As you heard, there is.
Let's talk about somebody who's just negotiated recently with NCI about getting that technology to commercialize.
Yeah, I mean, it did take us 6 months as a postdoc, which is not even as onerous as a federal employee. It took me 6 months to get approval to have this dual role, being an NIH scientist.
Yeah, no, that's very difficult.
What it really boils down to is partly the IP, because the NIH owns all of our intellectual property in the area, any area that NIH sponsors research in. So it's not just your research. As a researcher for the federal government, the statutes say that anything related to health research that NIH funds, NIH owns our intellectual property. So it's almost impossible to work with a company as a federal employee in any capacity that it does anything with biotech.
So solutions to that intellectual fence you described, they lie with Congress.
I mean, it also, there are ways around it, and it's people's willingness to allow those pathways to go through, and it took a lot of really wanting to do it, and a supportive principal investigator who wanted to see it happen.
So explain the process that evolved from the time that you did your bench work to where you actually have formed a company around the bench work you were doing inside of NCI.
Yeah. So I mean, I was a postdoc for several years. Then I switched to be a contractor for about a year, where I played this dual role. And that was the solution, but it took them 6 months to come up with that solution, and it should have been like that, right? And so
any other place it is like that.
Yeah, and it went through layers of review, and my scientific officer the scientific director of my institute had to stamp it. And NCI is a pretty big place, and he doesn't really want to be stamping postdocs doing dual roles, but he did. And so, there's a bunch of unnecessary hurdles, and there's uncertainty. I think that's the biggest thing is like no one really knows what the right answer is, and so they just don't do anything, right? And that's the problem. That's the real crux of the problem. But then, so we did contractor role, and then I switched to become a volunteer at NIH so that I can still collaborate and work on the project. Since I'm no longer getting paid, that alleviates most of, I won't say all of, but most of the conflict of interest roles.
Jared, go.
A quick question, given you've just gone through this process, if you put yourself in the shoes of Montgomery County, is there something that they could do to incentivize? They obviously can't change policy, but for people who do want to take
Yeah, I just want to
technologies
say,
out.
Rich is going to take care of all those policies through the task force. So
For the Life Science Advisory Board?
yeah.
Oh, yeah, right, sure. No
No
brainer.
pressure.
No pressure anyway. But
I mean,
Is there anything Montgomery
I think-
County could do for those who would like to take technologies out, independent of the policies that are prohibiting or
well,
restricting?
I think Montgomery County can encourage the government to change, but it's internal in NIH. And the reality was the reason why we figured out how to do it is I found another entrepreneur who used to have a technology at NIH, and he said, this is what you need to do. But it shouldn't have been someone who spun out of NIH 10 years ago that told me how to do it. It should have been the ethics office that said that in the first conversation, and that's the issue. That's the problem.
So it's interesting. We've done a little investigation of this to look at other government agencies and other labs, national labs. And what's interesting about this is what Jared, for instance, talked about with regard to NIST. So NIST is much freer to do these kinds of things. They're also part of the federal government. They're a different department. They're commerce, not HHS. But there are also lots of national labs in other states who have, the departments of which is mainly Department of Energy, is actually put in a performance criterion in their employees' performance plans that says you have to be an entrepreneur. That is one of the purposes of this national lab. It's not just to do cool stuff, internally. Unless it's externalized, you're not going to get promoted. And then they created policies that would allow that to happen. So other national labs have already done this. But when we try to investigate why this happened, it actually came from local leadership. It didn't come from the Washington national people. It came from the environment, the county and the state around those national labs, because they were the ones who realized, if we can unlock everything in these labs, then who's going to benefit is the immediate citizen, right? So they were the ones who provided the political capital, which eventually resulted in these federal changes.
So Jared, let's talk a little bit more from an industry perspective. What's working for MedImmune in this county, enabling you to grow your business, and what are things you'd like to see improved for MedImmune in this ecosystem to help you grow faster?
So I can give actually two of the same answers, which is talent, and I think I can answer both of those questions with talent. So I think one thing that is great about Montgomery County is that we have access to some of the smartest scientists in the world, and from a scientific perspective, I think that is incredibly valuable to our organization. So we've got a great education system that's extremely valuable, that generates good talent. We're able to hire good talent. So I think that's one of the many benefits of being here. On the flip side of that, we also struggle sometimes to get top talent because of the mentality that we're trying to recruit people from out of state, and then they'll say, well, if things don't work out at MedImmune and AstraZeneca, where do I go from here?
Yep.
If they're sort of a big pharma type of person. And we actually would love to see other big companies here. Yes, we realize we will lose talent to them, but at the same time, we'll be able to get additional talent, both from the outside and from those other companies. And interestingly, I've heard that even from some of the small companies as well. So it would be a dream come true for me personally if we had, two other major biopharma companies right here in Montgomery County. It's much easier said than done, I appreciate, but I think that would be extremely helpful.
So you mentioned talent. Can you define what kind of talent that you have difficulty in attracting to MedImmune here?
Yeah, we've had, when you think about sort of general management talent, for example, or senior level management, we've had several cases where people have come in and looked at MedImmune and then decided not to come here. I think if it's someone in the lab, I think that may be a little bit easier because there are a lot of opportunities around here.
Okay. So, but if you could wave the magic wand and do one thing different, Jared has been very intimately involved in building the ecosystem for the biohealth capital region. MedImmune has put their money, their knowledge, their resources, their people behind everything that's happened to progress this region. What are the things you would attribute to the greatest successes you've seen with all of the effort you're putting into it? And what are those areas you'd like to see some greater improvement in the future based from an industry perspective, Jared?
That's a really good question. I think where we have seen a lot of progress being made, and it sounds pretty simple, but getting people connected. Because I'll tell you one example. When we first hosted the CEO dinner series, so we've been doing this now for about 3 years, in the very first dinner, we had about 35 CEOs that attended, and a lot of them didn't know each other. And a lot of them, their companies were a couple hundred yards apart, and that really surprised us. So we later invited their CFOs. Guess what? A lot of the CFOs didn't know each other either. I'll give an example without mentioning names. There were some outside groups that we were working with, and somebody said, oh, well, can you help us get in touch with so-and-so because there's a lot of competition between us, and we'd really like to break down those walls. And I looked at him, and I was puzzled. I said, if you actually understood what they did, there would be no wall. So, yes, I would be more than happy to connect you. And I think there's a much better relationship there now. So I think a lot of it comes down to getting people to know each other, working with each other. We've built up great relationships with the University of Maryland and Johns Hopkins University. Just as an example of how getting connected can be beneficial, the president of Johns Hopkins had never been to MedImmune in the 25-year history of the company since we started these efforts. He's been here half a dozen to a dozen times, and we've helped each other in numerous ways. So again, it's about getting to know people, understanding what they do, and then having aligning around a vision of becoming at least, I would promote a top 3 biohealth cluster by 2023. I think when we can share a common vision and we can help each other get there, despite the competition that inevitably has to occur, I think we will all be better off. Sort of to answer the question about what I would like to see different, and this addresses one of the LSAB efforts, and it's around capital. So what I would like to see are more Anthonys, people who are entrepreneurs, so that when investors from outside the region, so you might have heard, we need more capital in this region. Well, yes, that's absolutely correct. But if you go out and you talk to those VCs and you talk to those investors and you ask them, why aren't you here? Why aren't you investing more? The number one answer that we hear is they don't know who the Anthonys are. They've got the capital. They can take the technologies from here. In fact, I think 85% of technologies from Hopkins actually leave the state. But they don't know the entrepreneurs. So we need more successful, proven entrepreneurs, and we need to make sure that investors outside of this region know who they are and how to access them, so that they'll say, you know what, I want to start a company here in Montgomery County.
So basically, were you going to add on to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think about this sometimes I was trying to simplify things so in my own mind. So I think about connectivity, capital, and crowds. That's really what you need. So why connectivity? If you look at our competition regionally, it's Boston, San Francisco, and Montgomery County, or the state of Maryland. And when you talk about Boston, you're actually not talking about Boston. For the most part, you're talking about East Cambridge. And that gets to the third C, which is crowds. Scientists are like honeybees. They like to bump into each other, and packing density is really important. And in Montgomery County and in the state of Maryland, it's a big place. And literally there's a Starbucks in the middle of East Cambridge where, like, at any one time there won't be 5 deals going on in the Starbucks. Whereas here, those deals are going on, but one's in Silver Spring and one's in Gaithersburg and one's in Rockville, and they're not going to run into each other. So that's why the connectivity is much more important to do that crowd, get those crowds artificially, because unless we decrease Montgomery County to the size of East Cambridge, which is probably not a good idea, or outside of your powers, we need to have some way to concentrate this. But the other way to do it is to have more entrepreneurs in a fixed space. Right? And that, because what Jared said, it's counterintuitive, but if you ask people in San Francisco, why is biotech so vibrant there? They say because it's really easy to take a risk here, as far as personnel is concerned. Because I'm willing personally to take a risk. And I know that 9 times out of 10, this project is going to fail. It's just the way drug development works. But that's okay. Because if it fails, I got 5 companies within 200 yards of here who I can go to. And that's not the case here.
Why not?
I think part of it, well, you'd have to answer this. But my observation is that part of it is immutable. That is, it's just a bigger space. But part of it is that there are geographical areas. But part of it is that the environment for the venture capital people who really drive a lot of this has actually decreased quite dramatically in the last 15, 20 years. And you think about, I often think back to one of the original biotech companies. Does anybody remember what one of the original biotech companies was called? Human Genome Sciences. And that was started by 2 people, Craig Venter from NIH and Bill Hazeltine from Harvard. Now, they could have located that company, Human Genome Sciences, in Boston or Montgomery County. And back then, they chose Montgomery County. What do you think the chances of that happening today are? Essentially 0. So it's not that it's
No, it's better than that because we have a new spin out of MedImmune that's going to locate in Montgomery County today.
Right, but But I mean, the point is that this is perfectly possible. It's already happened. If you look at Celera, Human Genome Sciences, Celera, Tiger, there's many of them. But and part of this I assigned to the NIH, right, which is what we were talking about before. But I think there are things that can be done.
Yeah, and the key would be then, we've been talking about a mature business, we've been talking about a federal institution with lots of money. How about it as an emerging entrepreneur? You've been very fortunate to progress to where you are today with both of these entities. Where do you see the next wall that's going to come up, and what is it that you're going to need in order to enable the same kind of growth you've had in the first couple years to continue with these emerging companies where there's greater competition for resources and money as you continue to progress?
Well, I'm hoping you'll make that a lot easier for me. But, no, I mean, it is about money, and companies follow their investors. Their investors have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure they're taking care of their money, and they don't want to get in a plane, and they don't want you to have to get in a plane. And so at a certain point, finding local money is the easiest way to ensure that the company stays. And, I mean, I really do want our company to stay here. Hopefully, when we have early grants from the state, the things which will force us to be here in the short term. But at Series B, when you go from an SBIR grant for $300,000 or $1 million, and you're out looking for $25 million, if that lead investor isn't okay with you being here, you're going to leave, and that's the real key, I think, is finding. And those investors are here, or maybe New York is not so far, and I'm maybe hopefully optimistic that we'll find a lead investor or an early licensing deal that will keep the company.
There is some hope, and before we turn it to the audience for questions, which I'm sure a few of you have, I'll talk about a couple positive developments that MedImmune's helped bring about over the last 3 to 4 years. One is, how many of you know MAVA, the Mid-Atlantic Venture Association? There used to be an annual biotechnology conference in this region that MAVA used to put on, but it ended when they couldn't get local support, and they had to bring North Carolina in to help support it because there wasn't the financial resources to hold an annual biotechnology conference within Montgomery County or in Maryland. It died as a result of that because the people lost interest because it wasn't local. It became a little disconnected. And then about 4 years ago, Jared basically and MedImmune said, we need to initiate something to get this industry together again. And so that's what the vision for the BioHealth Capital Region Forum, and how many in the audience have been able to attend that at MedImmune. This will be the 4th annual year for it. MedImmune provides the space for it. We had 1,100 registrants in the 3rd year, starting with 600 the 1st year. And if you want to talk about connectivity, those 2 days, on April 23rd and 24th this year at MedImmune, if you don't have it down, it's be there or be square, because that is really the major biohealth life science event in this region that occurs annually, and you have a chance to connect by invitation only, and we had over 300 C-level people at that event last year. So that, I thank MedImmune for helping create that and actually lend their facility to that. Second thing, which very few people in this room know about, everybody's talking about capital and access to capital. And I don't even know if Chris knows about this. Next 2 dates that you need to think about are October 9th and 10th, 2018. We're going to have the first BioHealth Capital Region Investment Conference. And we have been talking about JP Morgan's in San Francisco. Wilson Sonsini puts on investor conferences in Boston, San Francisco, and Austin. Who puts on investor conferences in the BioHealth Capital Region in Maryland or DC? Nobody. We're going to have the first National BioHealth Capital Investment Conference. Companies are going to be able to apply. We're going to invite many investors, venture capitalists, investment bankers, as well as family offices to come. One-on-one meetings will occur from an Anthony Sala and his company and an investor most likely from outside of this region to give them exposure to the quality deals that are happening in this region. It's going to happen at MedImmune again, which is the epicenter. If you look at we have 800 companies within Virginia, DC, and Maryland. 550 are right in Maryland, Montgomery County. So this is the epicenter for the BioHealth Capital Region and a great place for this to happen. So I want to again compliment MedImmune. Another partner we have in the audience, I think John Rubin's there, right, John? And there's JP Morgan on the West Coast, but we have JP Morgan on the East Coast. John represents JP Morgan here in the DC area. JP Morgan is going to be a partner in this event that we're going to have, which is fantastic to have that name associated with it. So I just want to say, while we need to fix some things, there are some things that are working that are going to improve the environment going forward, but it takes the collaboration of the people that are all at this panel to make that happen. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions for any of our panelists.
Thank you very much. Jonathan Cohen, 2020 Gene Systems. First, I want to thank Councilmember Leventhal for hosting this event. I think he was a little overly modest when he introduced himself. The county biotech tax credit that Rich mentioned would not exist but for the efforts of Councilmember Leventhal. He put it across the finish line. So he's not just somebody who talks, he's a person of action, which unfortunately is all too rare among politicians these days. I want to return to Rich's comment about the intramural program, the $3 billion a year that sits between 355 and Old Georgetown Road in Bethesda. I don't believe the conflict of interest change about a decade ago or so is really that fatal. There is a legal mechanism for federal investigators to collaborate with companies. It's called a CRADA, Cooperative Research and Development Agreement. Our company was to some extent founded many years ago with an NCI CRADA. The challenge with the CRADAs for smaller companies is that there's usually an expectation that they bring to the table resources, funding particularly, which is not always easy. So one of the suggestions I'd like to make with this new piece of council legislation being worked on is that George, that you maybe tweak it a little bit. And I think it's a fantastic idea, by the way, to have an SBIR match, but I wouldn't limit it to a federal, an NIH grant, but I would include an NIH CRADA. So in other words, it would be a little different. So if a Montgomery County company forms a CRADA at the NIH, and they are somehow able to procure some support from their investor base or whatever, there would be some match from the county, whether it's 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 could be debated. But I think that would be a practical tool to improve the ecosystem between companies and the intramural program, and it would also send a message to the leadership of the NIH, the intramural leadership, and even our congressional delegation, that the county is stepping up, and now we need the federal policies to follow suit.
Yeah, I would just say, absolutely, what you're hearing is absolutely correct, and about CRADAs. And CRADAs are wonderful. We do them all the time.
You want to tell them what it stands for? And how
It's called a Cooperative Research and Development Agreement. And they're great for certain applications, but what often happens is that the NIH investigator doesn't want to keep working on something. They don't want to have a cooperative agreement. There's an investigator, there's a postdoc, a graduate student, something in the lab who wants to take that with them, take the IP, and go form a company. That happens every single day in universities. But I'll just give you an example of what two of our guys tried this a couple of years ago, and what they were told was that the only thing they could do is to go out with leave NIH. They could then go raise money, but they couldn't say that organization had any special access to the IP that had been developed when they were federal employees. So just imagine the situation that they're in. They're just, Joe Nobody now, who had a lot to do with creating this IP, but now they're young people, have no record. And they go to an investor, and the investor says, I really believe in you, but I don't know what I'm investing in because you're telling me that this IP has to be put on the open market, and if Pfizer wants to bid, or MedImmune wants to bid on it, there's no way in heck you're going to get it, Mr. Little Guy. So they don't get funded, and they leave the state. That's what happened. And this happens over and over and over again when you want to do a spin out. Now, CRADAs are fantastic. I love that. So the example I told you about, that was a CRADA, and it worked great. And I think the suggestion to have the county match them, that's a fantastic idea. But it's a limited one. I just ask you to do a thought experiment that we did actually within the LACB. If you look at statistics and you look at all of the universities in the state of Maryland and half of them in Pennsylvania, that's about $3 billion right there. And you ask how many companies are spun out of that $3 billion versus the $3 billion at NIH. And the number is different by about 2 orders of magnitude, about 1 to 100. Now, there's only three possible explanations. One, the work going on at NIH is interesting but irrelevant, or the work at NIH is just bad, or there's something holding it back. And the first two I could eliminate with data that I could tell you, but so it appears to us just from the data that there's got to be something holding this back, and that's why we're interested in. Not that CRADAs aren't great, not that you're able to do it, thank God, but there's so much more that could be done.
Michael Saghaler with NCI. So I'm with a unit that was formed by the former director Doug Lowy to sort of be the sales and marketing arm for NCI. What I think the county could help with, and that we need to work on internally, is to better advertise the fact that the innovations at NIH are actually available to work with or to license. Our group met among many meetings with Montgomery County Economic Development, and we told them that you can license technologies out of IH, and you can do cooperative agreements to develop new IP. And of course, NIH has always been in Montgomery County, and Montgomery County Economic Development said, we didn't know you did that. So that's how you know you've got an awareness problem. So what we're trying to do, and I think would help, is that some of these forums is when there's an NIH investigator talking about their work, what we're trying to do is, for example, give information on the patents, the patent number, where they can find out more information about it, because there's a disconnect between somebody presenting their work and people in the audience from the commercial and investor community knowing they can actually access that technology. So one thing, for example, we're trying to do is analogous to if you're extramurally funded at NIH, you're required to have the grant number on your slide of your presentation or on your poster. What we're trying to do is have their invention number for intramural on these types of activities, so that when somebody comes by the poster, they're like, what's that? Well, that's my patent number. Oh, I can license that? Yes. So, and then the other quick comment is the efforts that you're making to try to loosen the reins at NIH would be very much appreciated. There's a very low cap to royalties. And an additional problem is that we're losing talent just within NCI to our most prolific licensors left for Stanford and Pitt because of the restrictions. So the restrictions are 20 years old. They're because of things happened literally 20 years ago that are still in place. And so anything that can be done to loosen those would definitely stimulate commercialization.
So maybe just one quick comment on that. So if and when those restrictions are loosened, I think from a Montgomery County standpoint, the question I would be asking well in advance of that is, how can we become a safety net, and what can we be offering companies to incentivize them or these entrepreneurs as they come out of the NIH? Right. And by having a first mover advantage, I think that would put Montgomery County at a competitive advantage.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, all of this is evoking a ton of questions in my mind. Like, from the county's perspective, I don't think we care that much whether the researcher is still in the federal lab or moves out and commercializes. So if the restrictions take place while they're at the federal lab and it incentivizes them to move out faster, that's not necessarily a bad thing if we're starting a new company. That's the first thought. The second thing in response to Mike's point is, are we clear as to what is BHI's role versus what is MCEDC's role? Because when you, if you were there, Rich, or your team were there, you would not have been surprised to learn that NIH had all of these inventions. But MCEDC is a relatively green, new organization, and they're sort of finding their way, and they may not have the vocabulary or the knowledge that BHI does. So there is a question about, is there some...
Yeah, I think there's greater connectivity. I mean, we have 17 people dedicated to life science and biohealth. They have one person on their whole team that focuses on that. So that's where there has to be greater communication and collaboration. If they find something that we can help them with, we can work together on that. But
Maybe delegation. I mean, maybe it should have been
sure,
BHI in the first
delegation,
place.
but also from Michael's perspective, just having the patent portfolio and a patent that could be licensed from an investor perspective may not be enough. Sometimes the investors are looking for a team or someone to lead that other than just the technology. And so the key is, how can we help match an entrepreneur potentially that may not exist with that technology if the person's not going to leave NCI with an investor. And that's a little more complicated, but something that may be feasible. And that's something we could work together with you on.
This is excellent. We're getting a lot of hands up. I'm going to hand the microphone here, and then it'll be followed by our colleague here in the front, and then it'll be followed by this gentleman.
Martha.
Thank you. Martha Schoonmaker with PICMC, Montgomery College's Integrated Academic Business and Research Campus. Back to the question about MCEDC and then BHI's role. I sort of view MCEDC as the marketing arm for the county, and being able to take what's going on with BHI and others and getting the word out. I don't know that life sciences or biotech is the immediate thought when somebody says Montgomery County, Maryland, when you are in San Francisco or elsewhere. So having a program, marketing program that really, I mean, we're sitting here and all of this is not a surprise to us, but I would venture to say in other states it would be quite shocking. And so to be able to publicize these great things and opportunities would be huge.
My name's Jim Hawkins, and I sort of bring three perspectives to this. One, I was a postdoc at the NIH, so I've been into the research environment, one I've enjoyed. I spent about 15 years then building early stage companies, biotech companies, 3 of them here in Montgomery County. And then the last 10 years I've spent as an investment banker, really an M&A banker, not really somebody who would do what most people want here, is raise me a few $1 million. I'd like to make a broader statement, but maybe I could put a finer point on this discussion of the NIH, which I agree is a great repository of technology and knowledge and so on and so forth. I think rather than looking at the NIH like a Gordian knot where we have to cut it apart, I think it's more important to appreciate it as an institution that is very unique to this place. And in the current age on the with the assault on institutions, I think we should remind ourselves that basic research is really important, and it's the wellspring from which all applied research comes. And there is a special state of mind that you need to do it. You have to believe in it in and of itself. And my general experience in dealing with academic institutions in general is that there actually are a very few number of people who are really qualified to be the entrepreneurs that we really need to build biotech companies. So we're not going to get everybody at the NIH to turn into an entrepreneur no matter what. And to put a finer point on the earlier statements, I was at the NIH when the policies came through to open up the ability for a researcher to go and get involved with companies. And there were 2 things that were said. One was that the atmosphere that exists and needs to exist in a basic research institute, which is open communication, would be compromised because people would want to keep secrets and do this and do that. And I thought, phooey on that nobody's that unprofessional. I watched that start to come about, and conversations become restricted. Then there's always the problem that somebody will do something they shouldn't do, even if it's simple. And in the case of this, it was a matter of having equity in a company, in a private company. And really, the issues there were not that there were a whole bunch of bad people there, but they didn't understand the conventions of commercializing things. Disclosure is everything, but people weren't disclosing things. So I think that probably the senior management at the NIH said, look, and I think it's important for us to all realize this, the NIH has to hold itself to a higher standard as a basic research institution, or it becomes vulnerable to all kinds of attacks. And the basic research part of it is more valuable than the stuff that will come out of it, if you will. And I don't say that lightly, because I co-instruct a course with Steve Ferguson, who's in the tech transfer office at the NIH, and I know Michael well, and so on. There are people that come to these classes, and I've looked at some of the business plans that come through Michael's course. And these are wonderful ideas. You know, you almost think, well, they're just going to go do it. But as I said, a lot of the people are not going to go do that. So I'm afraid that the way we have to look at it is we have to preserve the NIH as a research institution. And whatever it takes, however much harder it is to get the really good technology out of there, which I would tend to agree is better and more plentiful than in a lot of other places I've looked at in academics. But we have to work harder at that, is what it amounts to. And I've seen that. In one of the companies I did, there was a full professor in a university, and he was willing, he didn't want to take any stock. He felt that for other reasons he didn't want to. That allowed the technology to move out with one of his postdocs, and then it was
one was able to nucleate it after that. So I think the model that we have to look at, instead of, like, as I said, cutting the Gordian knot and just trying to diminish or be ultra critical of what's there, I think we have to look at particular avenues to bring the people out that are truly qualified and want to do this, and have an environment that's receptive for them. I won't talk anymore after this. Give me one more second. To offer my overall, though, perspective on biotech here, and I've been here for a long time. I've been here, I remember when MedImmune was one of 3 companies on Firstfield Road sharing a equipment room. So, and I've watched various generations pass through here. And I think that the way we have to look at it is that it's like the tide going in and out. And I think that I could maybe count 2 or 3 times when the tide has gone in and out here. And everything everybody said here is right. This is a great place. It's got all kinds of resources. I could talk it up in a minute. But the tide is out here right now. When I was out at J.P. Morgan in January, and I walked through the rooms there, or I talked with I have some interns that are there now and so on, there's energy in San Francisco that's not here. And you need, beside the resources that everybody here knows we have, you need that spark and energy. You need that drive. You need somebody who's going to say, to hell with it. I'm out of here. I'm a nobody. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm going to make this thing happen. I'm going to find people around. And that's also when I think we can bring our resources to it, which are far greater than when I first started here, as a matter of fact. But so I won't dominate the conversation here, but let me offer you one thought. If I were to say there are 2 things here that we lack and we need to push the tide back in again. One of them is venture capital, and I don't mean NEA, okay? They have a business model. They're basically a small private equity group, okay? They cannot invest in the kind of small enterprises that are necessary to drive biotech. So we need 3 funds here, $100 million funds, venture funds, that are driven by people who want to take risk. And I agree with you, when you get bigger, you have to, control risk. But at the beginning, you want people who are really going to take risks. And we don't have them. And I don't think we can reach out to other places like Boston and get them. We have to build them ourselves. And we don't need one $20 million fund. We need $300 million funds. I don't raise funds, so I'm not saying this for any self-serving reason. That's one thing. The other thing is, we need people who have profited from this environment to give back to this environment. Craig Venter and Bill Hazeltine are not in this room. And if they were, I would say the same thing. These are people who've done very, very well monetarily, and they've not really given much back. Now, that's going to exist in a lot of places, but I've been an editor-in-chief of a journal where Marv Crothers was on the editorial board. He worked with George Rathman and built Amgen, and contributed to a lot of companies. He built buildings at University of Colorado. This is a guy who's all about giving back. And a lot of people have profited from that. And you get one person to do that, and other people follow. So those are the 2 things. If I were going to offer you something that will push this tide back in again, it would be people who really want to build vital venture funds and deploy them here, and people who, once they've been successful, will contribute in some way. And I still think the best way is put your money in if you've made money, and drive it forward. And that will facilitate all of our efforts going forward, and we won't have to, gild the lily. It'll just be obvious. Okay, sorry, I've had my say.
Wow, a lot to unpack there. That was great. I really appreciate the defense of NIH and the integrity of NIH as a basic research organization. So there's a balance there that has to be maintained.
I do have to add, look, I was just asking you to do a thought experiment. MIT is one of the most prolific commercializers in the world. When you think about MIT, do you think they've compromised their scientific principles and they don't do fundamental research? It's a canard that it's one or the other, is what I'm saying.
I mean, if the answers to some of this lie in Congress, I'm not a congressman, but I'm an elected official, it's always a balance. It's always on the one hand, on the other hand. You always try to, balance two competing priorities. So you want to avoid the ethical conundrums, foster the commercialization, but also defend the ability to have just very fundamental basic
Also, have to
knowledge.
keep in mind what's at stake here. People are dying. People are dying because of this.
We have to speed products to market.
Come on, people.
Right.
I mean, this is not a hypothetical discussion.
Right.
And I think we have to keep in mind these are the stakes.
It's not just about profits, it's
We're talking about
alleviating
creating a new
suffering.
Snapchat. That'd be one thing, but that's not
Right.
what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
And I just want to add to what Chris is saying. I mean, I don't think any of us want NIH to compromise integrity, but there are legal mechanisms that exist to help this happen, and they're not pushed.
Sure.
And there has to be a cultural change to say we're going to facilitate this. And when you had that postdoc come out, he probably didn't quit his job one day and go start the company the next. That probably happened over time, and that has to be facilitated, and that doesn't currently happen.
Before Chris gets his word, I believe, I like what Jim's saying, but at the same time, we have to continue our grassroots efforts. How would you like to have 20 more postdoc Anthony Salas to build companies around right in Montgomery County? Okay, NCI approached us, their education and training division, and said, we have 900 postdocs. A lot of them are looking for alternative careers, but they have no connectivity to industry. How do they find opportunities outside of the federal government and the bench? We have a partnership with now. We had 2 happy hours in the last week, 50 people down in Bethesda. There were 100 postdocs that came. And the key was you bring industry, venture capitalists, emerging entrepreneurs for them to interact with so that they understand opportunities that exist. So I think that there's a little breakthrough there, okay? And there's money that exists within NIH and the institutes to have to foster this, because when Anthony came to us, they paid half of him, we picked up the other half. We had a board meeting at BHI with a lot of industry leaders. He made a presentation about how he's progressed, and they said, we'll take an Anthony. I had 5 people on the board from large companies saying, how do we get access to a postdoc like that who can get industry experience that we could also share at BHI to get entrepreneurial experience? That's a grassroots effort that we have control over that doesn't require congressional change. It's caused proactivity and making the connectivity with the people that have the resources that connect with the people that have the desire. And I think we need to do more of that here within this county.
Kudos to everything.
Pardon me?
I said kudos to everything, all of that. And I think celebrating all of this is important. So,
Who are you?
I'm sorry, this is Chris Frew with BioBuzz. I'm an entrepreneur, and I've got energy to do something, so that's why I'm here. BioBuzz is a local nonprofit, and we host networking events as well every month. About 100 people in Montgomery County come out. Our tagline is we help scientists culture relationships, not just cells. And we've been around for 7 years. So it's, the ecosystem has grown tremendously in 7 years, and it's amazing to see. And, 7 years ago, there was just a couple organizations doing it, and now there's just a plentiful, again, vibrant ecosystem. But again, celebrating the entrepreneur, I've known Anthony for a long time and Rich for a long time, and not only celebrating his success, but celebrating the mentorship from MedImmune and celebrating the mentorship from Rich. I mean, those are the stories we got to tell. You want, successful companies and entrepreneurs who sold their companies and they're now, investing in a real estate trust and out on a yacht. Celebrate the entrepreneur. Like, talk more about the Bill Hurls who are opening up their space and creating private incubators. And that's the stuff and the stories we need to keep telling. Events like this is fantastic. This is what needs to be, shouted from the rooftops. So NIH and commercialization isn't my bag, but I do know as an entrepreneur the quickest way to help an entrepreneur is with clients and revenue. So the connectivity is important. I do want to do a plug. The annual MAST showcase BioBuzz ISBE puts on is May 10th. And it's an annual vendor showcase to try to connect local companies with local vendors. It's a great way, we hear it all the time, with a lot of our, especially the contract research, contract manufacturing, it's a big part of our ecosystem. and a lot of them do most of their business out of state. So, you know, I'd like to put that as maybe a topic to discuss. Like, what else can we do to support the other components of the ecosystem with, you know, revenue and relationships? And again, I hope NIH comes out, you know, to it, and NCI, that we usually see a good amount of that. But that's another area of connectivity that we can support that, you know, will help a lot of companies.
Last couple questions?
Yep.
Thanks, Rob Allen. By day, I work at the FDA as a medical device reviewer, and by night and also day, I'm a PhD professional development enthusiast. My comment before, I was at University of Pittsburgh 2 years ago as a PhD student. So first of all, I want to say I really commend the efforts that Rich mentioned about connecting PhDs and postdocs with the resources they need to develop into successful professionals, and also to get them connected with the whole biohealth ecosystem. I think that's access that a lot of people don't have in other regions. I did want to sort of play maybe slightly devil's advocate and ask about, I guess, a related comment Rich made initially, which was that we don't necessarily need successful serial entrepreneurs who've done many biotech exits when we have great folks like Anthony. And I generally share that feeling, but I did want to ask, can we use more experience in biotech entrepreneurship that's not in town? Do we have enough? Can we basically, what is the role of that experienced, successful entrepreneur, and how can we leverage that?
Yeah, I hope I didn't mislead you. We need more Bill Hurls. We do need more Michael Richmond's. Amplimune that sold to MedImmune, and he's got NextCure now. So, I mean, we need more of those people, but at the same time, there aren't that many of them exiting on a day-to-day basis. At the same time, you need to work in the grassroots to cultivate entrepreneurs that want to be here, that are already here, that you don't have to recruit, that have great science, have great knowledge. They're just not connected and don't have great networks. And that's part of that mentoring that needs to go on. But we need both. We need serial entrepreneurs as well as we need emerging entrepreneurs within this region.
And those serial entrepreneurs, that was one of the topics of conversation with the Life Sciences Advisory Board. And there was even a proposal put on the table to provide some sort of economic incentive to bring folks like that to the region. So I think your point about we need a good mix is absolutely right.
But they're here and they're willing to help. You know, I have 4 on my board, my company.
How'd you find them?
A mix of, you know, networking through BHI, networking through, you know, other people. I mean, yeah, it was, you have to put yourself out there and you find people, and people believe in what you're doing, and then you kind of latch on to them and make them help you.
So shall we have one more question,
One
two
more
more
question.
questions? This will be the last question.
Well, one more question.
Thank you. Thank you for the panelists. My name is Yurong Jiang from MedImmune AstraZeneca. Since Rich mentioned about those postdoc opportunity, I just want to share with audience. 2 weeks ago, I was invited in the NIH to give some presentation on the career development opportunity for the Pratt Postdoc Fellowship, a group of those. And apparently, they're really interested to explore the opportunity in the industry. And MedImmune, as one of the largest company here, apparently they have a lot of interest. But thinking in those whole areas, not just about MedImmune, it's about those whole cluster of those biohealth innovation regional forum that Rich, Jared, you are establishing. And I think at the core of those is the talent and investment, and people come first. And I really applaud those Montgomery County as well as the regional entrepreneur have those forum discussion. But my personal view is we should really eye for internationally, not just in those regions, attract international investment and talent. And I just would like to share with audience that there is one local organization, Chinese Biopharmaceutical Association. We have East West Coast over 8,000 members that we promote international collaboration, especially with some Chinese investor come over here. And we, last few years, we jointly had an annual conference with MedImmune AstraZeneca. This year is going to be June 9th. And we would have some CEO roundtable discussion, entrepreneurship, some other welcome you attend those conferences. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, that touches on another passion of mine, which is that we should really, really, really do more to promote language education, that if we're going to make ourselves globally competitive and market ourselves as the international gateway to the nation's capital, we have to be superb at lots of languages, and that starts very, very early. That starts in, before kindergarten, and so that's crucially important, is that we're very proud that there are so many languages spoken in our schools and so many languages spoken in the county, but that means we have to actually be good at those languages. We have to make that real. We can't just say, oh, isn't it wonderful? We have to really build an infrastructure that supports it. Any other comments on the global marketplace?
Maybe just one, I think, with CBA, that would be a great connection point with BHI. So as companies come to CBA and they're interested in exploring where they could land in the U.S., I think connecting that with the expertise of BHI would be a great conduit.
Glad to work with you and help you support your meeting on June 9th.
Thank you so much. Marvelous. Well, I know all of you get invited to a lot of meetings. I'm really glad you came to this one. This was a postgraduate course for me. I learned a lot tonight, and I'm enormously grateful. We had a rich conversation. All of you who participated and those of you who just listened and learned like I did, thank you so very, very much. I want to assure you that this is the kind of conversation that, on behalf of county government, we want to continue. We want to be thought of as open and welcoming, and there's a lot of questions, that this has stimulated in my thinking in terms of local responsibilities, land use, creating denser clusters. It doesn't just have to be one Starbucks, but clearly we've spread the activity out over 500 square miles. That may be a problem. So in terms of the applicability to my line of work, it's stimulated a great deal of thinking.
If I may just make one closing comment, one thing that we can all do to take a step in the right direction for increasing the biohealth in this region and in Montgomery County, if we all use the words biohealth capital region, and I won't go into detail, but I'll just say that if we're all talking about this area as the same thing with the same name, instead of 5 different names, people from the outside will start asking, well, what is the biohealth capital region? I need to know about this place. So that's one very small step we can all take.
All right. Meeting adjourned. Thank you very, very much. This was great.